So a big part of coding is actually leveraging other libraries to get things accomplished without having to spend the time to program that logic. And a lot of times there are plenty of videos about popular libraries that discuss how to use it, things like that. But not too often have I seen reviews of libraries. So I thought it might be a fun idea to do a series of videos of just reviewing popular libraries and looking at the experience from the documentation to the discoverability, and basically take popular libraries that I've heard of maybe but have never dealt with and just document the experience of learning about that library. And that might be useful for some people, because if you want to introduce a library into a project that you have, there might be a few tutorials online that show you how to get the basics started, but then you get into it and you run into some problems and you find you don't really want the library anymore because of some other baggage that it comes with, but then it's too late because it's already part of your project. So this will be the first of hopefully multiple videos on JavaScript library reviews. And the very first one is going to be Voca, which handles string manipulation in JavaScript. So we'll take a look at that. Now, I will say before we get started, if you find any of the content in this video useful, feel free to drop a like or subscribe to get more content like this. Also, if you find anything interesting while watching the video, feel free to comment, and things like that will help grow the channel. Great. So all I've done so far is just create a basic build process, which is going to allow me to use this Voca. And I've pulled up their website, and I just got that through Google. And I'm just going to kind of take a look at it and give maybe some of my first impressions and see how that goes. One thing I do like right off the bat is that all the information is right there. Sometimes, and especially this is when libraries can be a little more complex, they start to have to move a bunch of functionality to different pages, and it just makes it a harder experience, as opposed to right here we can see you've got all the different types of functionality or genres of string manipulation, and so you can see right away what the library has to offer. So I do like that. We can see they start off by giving us simple examples so we can kind of understand at least what we're working with. And then they show you how to install it, which thankfully, and as you'd expect for any popular library, it's npm ready. And if we look at the ES 2015 modules, import Voca, this is all I've done so far. And so now we should be ready to test anything out like this. And so if I just copy this, so if we go to here, squeeze this out a little bit more, save that. And we get goodbye blue sky as advertised. Get a little bit of information about the author. Thank you, Dimitri, for this library. So here we see kind of our first example of where the documentation is going to explain direct functionality. And so in this case, we see we're in the genre or the category of case, and then we see the different methods that are a part of that. And so we can see camel case, capitalize, etc. And so we're seeing that it's just explaining what it does, what the parameters are, what the return value is, and availability that presumably explains which version of Voca has this method and above. And then simple examples, which not all documentation includes examples all of the time. And so I think that is a big deal. That's a very positive aspect of at least this documentation so far. If it looks like pretty much all of these are going to include multiple examples, which is really nice. If I click on something, it just basically brings me right to it, which is what I would expect. And so let's take a look. We've got case, so camel case, capitalize, snake case. So basically different ways to just prepare a given string. Chain, it looks like it's a way to handle, obviously, a chain of different functionalities. Chop, handling things like getting substrings, I would imagine. Code point at first. So it appears that these are generally going to be giving you different chops of the original string. Count, I'm not sure when you would want to use this count over just getting the length of the string. I guess if you are maybe passing a variable, this might actually handle for if you're getting a null or an undefined, which I guess we can actually test that out. And we see 0. So that actually can be something that is useful then, where you don't have to check if undefined is a length or if it's a number and if whatever, unless you are actually needing to know if the length, if it is a string and the length is 0, or if it's not a string at all. And so some use cases for that. But if we keep looking on escape for escaping things like HTML, regex, unescape HTML, format for different printing, which can be common in other languages, I think I would probably still prefer to just use string literals. But especially if you are maybe a back-end dev and that's just more comfortable for you to use something like this, then I guess I could see a use case for that. Index as well as search. Manipulate, so this is where we're looking at things like inserting, Latinize to make sure, okay, that's cool. Repeat, replace, query, ends with red alert, alert true. Also, this is cool, just different checks. Split by character, code points, okay. So it's got stuff that's going to be useful just a small percent of the time, but then for those people who are going to need that, it's just kind of a time saver to not have to rewrite the functionality that's required to do these things. Strip, because who does not want to see a strip? And util, which I feel like these are pretty much all util, but oh well. So overall, I would say so far on the documentation, I think it's an extremely simple, easy to use, positive experience, and I don't really have too many complaints about it here. But let's get a look at maybe more examples of the library itself when we're coding. So what I'll probably do is maybe make just a bunch of different example strings and then just kind of play around with different features that we see on the documentation and just kind of see how simple it is to get the hang of, which by the look of everything, it looks very straightforward. So I don't have too many concerns, but we'll still play around with it a little bit. All right, so I just created a bunch of different strings, and I'll see if I can find a kind of a fun example for most of these main categories. I mean, so the case stuff, pretty straightforward. These are things that I think are not difficult to implement on your own, but especially if you are working on a project where you have to maybe do a bunch of different test cases for maybe form entry. It's going to be somewhere that you just get really tired really quickly of actually going through the logic of everything. So I do like that. It's there. It's something that even if it's on the simpler side to do on your own, it's going to save time, especially if you have to start doing a number of these different ones where you get the benefit of bringing this in, as opposed to just you needed to get rid of the spaces on a string, and you can write a simple function to do that. So let's take this example, and instead of back to school, oops, and we got to make sure that that is Voca. Actually, I'm just going to leave this as V, and here just change this to V because it's shorter. Don't forget to subscribe. Looks like it's separating that don't on, I would imagine, words. And so if I go to that here, I wonder if there's a way to make it so it's, yep, the string to split into words. So if we say words, so I definitely was messing around and ignoring the fact that what I was trying to accomplish was actually in the example, which is kind of nice given that you would hope you would hope they would take standard problems and give the examples of how you resolve those. In this case, it was that I just wanted the apostrophe to actually be included as part of a word. So don't, I wanted that to be a word itself, whereas by default it doesn't. And all it did was saying not a space. And so you keep going until you get to a space, and that's what a word is. And that appeared to work. So that's kind of cool. Now, I mean, I suppose what you could do just as easily is say a3 dot split, and you want to split on the spaces, and that's going to give you that same kind of array. And so I guess it's for more extreme examples. Even then, I guess I'm pretty sure you can actually do, if I remember properly, you can split on a regex. So some of these examples or some of these features are maybe not as useful, but I guess if you're incorporating the library into a project and you just want to have a standard way of doing things as opposed to someone re-implementing different things, this might keep things clean. And so there still is a valid reason to keep those things in it. So let's look at some of these chop. So I like the idea of this prune. Let's say A4 here. 10. I'm confused as I would expect that it would be SOME and then prune the rest. If we make this a massive number, we get everything. 10 is nothing. So it's not giving me the first 10. If I say 15, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, which just confuses me a little bit, unless I'm missing something. Truncates the subject to a due length and does not break the words. Guarantees that the truncated string is no longer than the length. And so the problem is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 would be what, the shortest I could do that would include something, and 11 would break it. Yep. So again, that was me not reading the documentation properly, which is my fault, obviously, but it's something that's an important reminder that you should always, if you're running into problems, especially if it's something that's a popular library, it's probably you. You're probably doing something wrong. It's probably unlikely that there's a larger bug or an obvious bug on a popular project, just because so many people work with it, which means if you have a simple problem, someone's probably already done that before, and so it probably works the way it should. And in this case, that's what we see. Escape HTML, that's one that I'm particularly interested in, just because especially if you're developing any application where you're using a database, that's going to be important to make sure you handle on the front end. And you have to do it on the back end as well, but it's good to always clean your data. And there we go. So now we theoretically should be able to take this string here, and we'll just set this. And that should be a and just like that, we are able to get that back. Format, I'm less interested in, just because of the fact that for me, if I want to format something, I am a lot more comfortable just using these string literals. So I can say my name is, and just use a $sign, and then I can just say A1 right there. And I think that's pretty readable, as opposed to, in this case, you have to remember that this is coinciding with 1, and boys is going to be 2, do is 3. So I don't think it's bad that they threw the functionality in, but it's just something that I would say isn't too useful, for me at least. And things like that, things like this again, where you've got these different ways to manipulate the strings, they're great. They're nice to have. I would say if you need one of these things, it's probably not worth bringing a library and bringing in the file to your project. But if you're doing things, like I said before, that are handling a bunch of different ways you want to parse form data, and you're having to work with strings, that's when a library like this starts to get useful. Same thing here, query. Testing is lower. Great name. And so is lower. A1 should be John. False. True. And if we say John space dash false, what if we allow the space? False. John. Okay, so I wonder then if I went to some of these cases and I decapitalize v dot is lowercase and I say v dot decapitalize a2, that's going to be false. And so let's look at here if there's a way. Parameter, true if the subject is lowercase or false otherwise. You know, it'd be nice if there was a way that you could add a specific characters or maybe a regex of characters that you don't even look at. And so you could ignore spaces, for example, and then it would allow you to say, is this fully decapitalized sentence lowercase? And it would provide that functionality. So maybe that's something that will be added, but at that point I'm kind of, I guess, a little bummed that it's not already there. We already kind of looked at a split example. Strip bytes, order bark, and I guess a final example that I wanted to look at was Latinize, and that was to test with some of this German. Oh, and that was not them, that was me. But here we see we got the Latin version. Though I will say the proper way that you would write that in German using only the Latin alphabet would be like that. And so it's, I guess, not designed to be a language specific library, so it's not anything I would fault them for. But the difference here is between you're beautiful and you are already, it doesn't make sense. So oops. So I just want to check out their GitHub. And if we look at distribution, .min 31.3 kilobytes, so not too big. Great. So what are my thoughts? Well, what I did was kind of write down some of the categories that I was going to look at, and I think for documentation, 5 out of 5. I really like this site. I think it's easy to work with. I like that everything's on one page, so I don't have to use their search. I can just say Command F, and obviously it's not this massive library, so it lends itself well to simple, aesthetically pleasing documentation. As for the ease of use, again, 5 out of 5. When it comes to a simple library by nature, all they had to do was not screw up, and I think they did a good job of that. Anytime I ran into problems, it was me not reading the documentation. There wasn't anything where I was trying to follow an example and couldn't, so I think full marks there. And then in terms of power, I would say 4 out of 5. And that just has to do with some of those fringe cases where it'd be nice to have some extra things involved, like trying to find if a sentence is all lowercase. It'd be nice to have the ability to add in things to ignore, just because, especially if you're a library that's the purpose of it is to help people handle simple tasks that they could write but don't want to. This is something that would be fairly easy to implement, and I think it would just make sense to have. But nevertheless, I think overall, positive experience with it. If I had to recommend it based on what I've seen today to anyone, I would say it just depends on the scope of of the problem you're trying to solve. If you need to just quickly have it to change a few things, it's probably not worth it. A lot of the things that you see here are things that you could easily implement in vanilla JavaScript using a Lambda function or just some inline code. But especially some of these things would take a little more time to do on your own. And in that case, great, I would use this. Or if you just need to use a bunch of these different ones that you could implement all of them simply, nevertheless, you don't want to do that. And like I said before, if you have the same library doing all of those different features for you, it can help code quality just because you know, okay, great, this is a Voca example, or this is a Voca bit of functionality that you're including in different places. And so it's something that you're able to then incorporate fully into your project. Great. So let me know what your thoughts are. If you've used it, I would love to hear about your experience. Otherwise, if you liked the video, if you liked the idea of doing a review of a library, I'd love to hear your opinions, thoughts. And otherwise, like I said before, likes, comments are going to help grow the channel. And I hope to see you next time. Take care.